You're listening to Tell Me Everything on Sirius XM Progress 127. Follow along on Twitter at John Fugelsang.
I'm always thrilled to welcome our good friend, the Reverend Barry Lynn, back to the show. Reverend Lynn is an ordained minister in United Church of Christ. For many years, he was executive director of Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, and he's been a longtime activist and civil liberties lawyer. You've seen him on NewsHour, on PBS, on Nightline, 60 Minutes, even the O'Reilly Factor, and maybe read his stuff in USA Today and the Wall Street Journal and The Nation. Barry's a good friend of the show, and he gives quite good film reviews, too. Tonight, however, Barry has brought a very special friend along, someone who I have read about for years and never had the pleasure to talk to before. Bill Baird is a reproductive rights pioneer, a legendary activist. He's called by some the father of the birth control and abortion rights movement. He is a man who has put his life and safety on the line for women's rights for decades. He was jailed 8 times in 5 different states in the 1960s for lecturing on abortion and birth control. He was legendarily arrested at Boston University for giving contraceptives to a student during a speech, and he is believed to be the first and only non-lawyer in American history to have 3 Supreme Court victories. What a great pleasure to welcome Reverend Barry Lynn and Bill Baird to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to see my good friend is on, too.
Thank you, sir, and hello, Barry.
Hello there.
It's great to have you both, and Mr. Baird, longtime fan, first time suck up. Thank you very much for your lifetime of service. For those who don't know your story, I just want to give them the backstory, and I know you've told many times how your career began in Harlem Hospital, but I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing that story with us again.
Well, I'd have to go back. I grew up in the slums of Brooklyn way back in the 1930s. That was a tough time because that's the time that we had the Great Depression. I had an alcoholic father, abusive, and then we had World War II, all within the same decade. But as I was growing up, my sister became ill. We didn't have money for a doctor. She's only 12 years old, and I was 9. And each night she'd scream in pain. My mother would always say, "Oh, she'll get over it." And finally, we couldn't take the scream, nor could the neighbors. Rushed her to the hospital, and she had appendix break. And sadly, she died. But she died because she was poor. We were a very poor family in the Great Depression. So as I went through the years of my life, I always try to say to myself, someday, if I get educated, get my degrees and so forth, I'll be somehow, hopefully, help society. And as fate had it, I was hired as clinical director for a birth control company, and I heard a scream at Harlem Hospital. I'll never forget certain things in your life you never forget. And I heard this blood-curdling scream, and I raced into the hallway, and to my horror, I saw this young Afro-American woman literally covered with blood from the waist down with an 8-inch piece of wire coat hanger protruding from her uterus. And I caught her because I was pretty fast in those days, not today, but then I was. I'm pushing 90 now, so I have one position that's called slow. But nevertheless, I tried my best to hold her and comfort her until help came, but she died. And I felt so badly because she died because she could not get an abortion. She could not get birth control because she was unmarried. And I said, this is outrageous. So I did the most logical thing. I went to Planned Parenthood. They had lots of money, multi-million-dollar organization. I said, hey, fight this crazy law called 1142 that said anyone who prints, publishes, or exhibits any means of birth control, you could go to prison. And of course, I thought that was nuts. So way back in can I say this now? 65? Wow.
Yeah.
The 65 coming up next week is the 57th anniversary of my being handcuffed. I had a mobile clinic. I would drive into poor areas, and the idea was to just help people learn, be comfortable, learn how their body worked, and teach them about birth control and the dangers of quack abortions like coat hangers and knitted needles. And that day I heard a police siren, and I said, I wonder who they were going after, because it was high-pitched. Lo and behold, they were outside my van They said, step out, you're under arrest for indecent exposure of obscene objects, showing birth control devices to unmarried people. And so I was arrested and jailed. And then the following year, Freehold, New Jersey, same thing. They were jailing unwed mothers on the charge of fornication, that if they fornicated, they could get pregnant, and therefore it would increase welfare costs. So they said they would lower the welfare costs by jailing them for a year. I thought that was nuts. So I went and I taught them birth control, and I was found guilty for teaching birth control. And then that's when the big test came. On the 7th of April, I had received a letter, shortly before then, from Ray Mungo, who was a very famous writer for the Boston University newspaper. And he said, Bill, he said, would you fight a law? It's called Crimes Against Chastity, Morality, Decency, and Good Order. And when he read me the law and told me it carried with it a 10-year prison term, I said, hey, man, I live in New York. You're way hundreds of miles away in Boston. I don't have any money for lawyers. I got 4 kids of my own, and money was always tight for me because I was always fighting court cases. And to make a long story short, he said, we'll get you a lawyer from the ACLU, which guarantee you that. So I took him at his word. Got up there, and I was shocked. There were 2,500 people to hear me speak. The largest audience ever for a lecture. So I got up and I started to speak. I never write out a speech, but I kind of feel the audience. But I saw there were at least a dozen cops. And I knew they were pretty hostile, so I figured maybe I can loosen them up because I speak extemporaneously. So I started to talk to them about birth control, and I held up, which is on my desk now, Time magazine, April the 6th, the same day of my challenging the law. And on the cover of Time magazine was a photograph of the pill, and I pasted on it St. Joseph aspirin that looked like the pill, and then I pasted the real pill. And I started to kid the cops. I said, hey, will you bust me for showing the real pill, a fake pill, or a photograph of the pill?
Brilliant.
They would do nothing. So to make a long story short, I was finally arrested, convicted, and put in a place called the Charles Street Jail. I had to deal with beatings, the threat of rape every night, and it was really a nightmare of a hellhole. But eventually, the U.S. Supreme Court would hear me, and on March 22nd, 50 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court said these powerful words that are real today than ever before. If the right of privacy means anything, it is the right of the individual to be free. The individual to be free, not married, the individual, to be free to decide whether to bear or beget a child. That case was called Baird v. Eisenstadt, and that's what legalized birth control in 1972. And then the following year, Roe v. Wade quoted my case 6 times, legalizing abortion.
That's right.
So
that's right.
How I got there.
What part of Brooklyn did you grow up in, Bill?
The tough section, East New York, a term that you probably won't know because you sound much younger than me, because I'll be 90, believe it or not, on June the 20th. What would happen was that I had a term called junking. I'd go from garbage can to garbage can and pick out newspapers. And in those days, if you got 100 pounds, go to a junkyard, they give you 75 cents.
That's right.
And since my father was an alcoholic, he wasn't around as much as we wish he could be, so food was short, and I would earn that money and give it to my mom, and that's helped us get through some difficult times in the Great Depression.
My dad grew up in Flatbush during the Great Depression.
He
was 1 year younger than you, but you know he lives in a neighborhood beset by gangs, etc.
Yeah, and there were tough gangs. I was a street fighter, and that's what enabled me to go through life and survive prison, because you have to. In those days, they had honor. I always carried a little 2-inch piece of wooden chip, and I'd put it on my shoulder. And when other older kids would come and try to steal my newspapers because they wanted to get them, sell them, but not do the work for them. And so the theory was you put it on your shoulder, they would knock it off, and then you'd begin to fight. And since I was so fast, before my chip hit the ground, I punched his nose and usually broke their nose, and they ran away. So I survived.
I mean, this is why I was so thrilled that Reverend Barry was going to get you here tonight, Mr. Barrett, because I've read your story many times, and you were, if you don't mind my saying, a very unlikely activist. But I've read how when you opened up the nation's first real abortion and birth control facility back in '64, so many thousands of women came to you seeking help, and you heard these stories that were not on the news, stories about rape, stories about botched abortions, and it seems like you were someone who had your empathy awoken in a powerful way that drove you to sacrifice your own needs for the good of others in your community.
Well, I love people. I learned that the living hell I went through as a child, that if I ever got to be an adult and live through what I was going through, that just maybe it would spread to other people and we would help each other as human beings. I just spotted on my desk now, if anyone's listening to this and know a magazine, which you may have heard of, called Sepia. It was a black magazine, sort of equal to Ebony. And the date of the magazine in front of me is July 1967. And why I carry this worn-out magazine, on the cover is my phone number, and it says, dial this number for an abortion. And the reason that's so significant, in 1967, there was a 10-page story about my clinic, but each person you help was a 10-year jail term. It was illegal to openly help women get abortions. But I wanted to challenge the law, and if I got arrested, I hoped I could somehow get heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. And that was my goal. And finally, when I did speak at Boston University, and I was convicted for the awesome crime, if you can believe this, showing obscene objects, the pill, the IUD, and a diaphragm. And the other crime was giving an unmarried 19-year-old. In those days, if you were under 21, you were a minor. Today, if you're under 18, you're a minor.
Correct.
But I gave a minor a can of foam. I was their clinical director. So by giving it to her, I was arrested. But then what I did was I showed the police in front of all the TV cameras that it was $3 for the chemical foam, but 9-cent sales tax. So trying to be funny, not a great comedian like you, but trying to be funny, I said, hey, if you're going to bust me, you got to bust the Attorney General for collecting an illegal sales tax.
Yeah, I love it.
Sales tax on a $3 sale.
I love it.
So, but they didn't think I was very funny. And they put the handcuffs on me. But nevertheless...
you know, the guys who cuffed Lenny Bruce didn't think he was very funny either. I want to bring Reverend Barry Lynn into the conversation because, Barry, I thought of you last week when this draft opinion of Sam Alito was leaked. And I've talked to so many people over the past week on the show. And I want to stress, I've talked to so many men who care so much about this issue. Of course, we've talked to lots of women, and we've had women activists on and women journalists on, but so many men who really do care about this issue. And, you know, I'm curious your thoughts on it. You think Roe is done?
Yeah, I'm afraid it is. I mean, they might clean up the draft a little bit. There's, of course, a quote from some guy from a century ago writing about why abortion should be a crime. But then many people have determined that, well, he also thought that women should be the property of their husbands. So there might be a couple of things taken out. But one thing, this is the issue that got me involved in the separation of church and state in the first place. I'm not sure I've told this story on your show. But when I was in college, I had a very good friend, and we were talking about what we were going to be doing for spring break. I said, what are you going to do? And he said, I'm going to London. And I said, that must be fun. And he said, no, we won't be having fun. But my girlfriend and I are going to London in order for her to obtain a safe abortion. And it wasn't until then that I realized that even in those liberal times in the late 60s, you couldn't go to Boston. You couldn't go to New York City and obtain abortion, or, as Bill points out, you couldn't even get contraceptives unless you were a married person. So this was a stunning awakening for me. One of the things that disturbs me about the discussions that frequently are going on CNN, for example, they have people who are 30 or 40 years old, men and women, and they're being asked to speculate. What would it be like if we lost Roe versus Wade? But there are people like Bill who know exactly what it was like and can talk about it with the passion that he's explained this to you tonight.
Well, Bill,
I'm worried.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Barry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I just think there'll be language. It's called dicta. It's not a holding of the case, where they say, well, but this is only about abortion. That is not true. Why should we believe for 1 minute that 4 liars who are on the Supreme Court because they lied about this very issue,
boom,
why should we trust them when they say, don't worry, it's not going to cover anything else? The people forget Clarence Thomas when he was being nominated. He was asked about Roe versus Wade, and his answer was, I can't remember ever talking about it. How can you not have talked about this seminal decision that people either loved or hated from the day it was decided? And then, of course, the 3 Trump people all managed to use wiggle words to avoid talking about what they would do if they had the option of overruling it. And the Democrats didn't do much of anything. They didn't say, wait a minute, stop there, Mr. Kavanaugh. Do you mean that it's such settled law that you will not overrule it if you have the opportunity? And of course, he would have said, because that's what they teach you to say if you're running for the Supreme Court, I can't possibly discuss that because it may come to the court.
Exactly.
Push on that. Amy Coney Barrett signed a letter a few years before she was nominated that called abortion barbaric. Barbaric. Do you need to know more about her and her position on this issue than knowing that she thinks that women's health exercised in this way is a form of barbarism?
Exactly.
I'd say you don't.
And well, also, we know we can't believe anything they say. And for everyone who's been terrified about this Supreme Court next going after marriage equality for LGBT folks, well, first, the last Republican platform for 2016, when they nominated Donald Trump, the last time they had a platform, they called for the overturning of Obergefell. And if you actually read Alito's opinions, he uses the same exact language in this draft opinion that he used in his dissent against gay marriage. I mean, the same exact language that he used when he dissented from letting gay people have the right to marry, not rooted in history. Precedent cannot survive these particular right-wing jurists. But, Mr. Baird, I want to ask you about something else, because I'm the child of an ex-Franciscan brother from Brooklyn and a former Catholic nun from the South who left and got married. And they were people who weren't fans of abortion, would never call themselves pro-choice, but they remembered what it was like before Roe v. Wade, and they would never vote for a politician who wanted to criminalize abortion rights. And I think there's a lot of folks from several generations that feel that way. They don't feel comfortable saying that they're pro-choice, but they don't want it to be made illegal. I've always admired the way that you actually have taken on the Catholic Church, not with any kind of hostility, but just with logic and morality. And you have talked about how some of your patients, when you ran your free clinic, were nuns who had been impregnated by priests.
Well, I had three nuns that were impregnated, but the sad note is that we try to tell people, try not to judge other people's lives. I got enough trouble leading my life, and it's a pretty aggressive life that I've had, because when you decide that you're going to jeopardize your freedom or perhaps your life by going into prison, which is a hellhole. The prison I was in was set on fire by one of the inmates, and I had an excellent chance of being burned to death, including the inmates who set the fire. So there's always a great risk factor, but I just want to remind the people that one of the things that kept me going all these years was the courage I learned from women. Because women would come to me, they would take a douching bag and fill it with Lysol or bleach or turpentine, and often enough they would take soap suds, and they didn't realize that soap has fat in it, and the body can absorb this fat in the soap, and they die of a fat animalism. Or they would take a baster that you use for turkeys, for gravy, and if you put in salt water, a couple of tablespoons of salt in a pint of water, you take that and you force that in, not only into the cervix, which is the opening of the uterus. If you force that in with one hard squeeze, you can force residual air, and you can die of an air embolism.
That's right.
And there's so many ways that I would say to people, look, come to me. I said, I will help you to the best of my ability. If I get busted, we'll do the best that we can to see that no one is hurt by the police. But the sad note is, my life has been, as corny as it may sound, and why I love Barry so much, that here's a guy who's getting out there. The world treats him pretty well, normally, but he risks his well-being by kind of taking the courage and courageous way of living that he does.
Yes, he does.
And gets things done. And I admire that because not many people do that. When I do what I do, it costs me. I don't know if you remember this, Barry, in particular. One of the times I lost my first wife and 4 children, I gave a speech in Huntington, Long Island, which is where I lived at that time. And I heard a scream at the end of the lecture hall, and I saw this woman on the floor being handcuffed. And all of a sudden, I'm on the floor being handcuffed, and the police in plain clothes, 5 of them, arrested both of us, saying she had brought her 14-month baby to the speech. And the baby was a minor, under 18, and they said that if the baby saw a diaphragm or a pill or an IUD, it would get sexual ideas. As nutty as that sounds, and we had up here before a judge, although we both were jailed overnight, we won the case, but after we won the case, my children got mail from all over the country telling me how they were going to be murdered for their father being the evil man that I was. And I think Barry had told me the other day that he knows somebody who for years thought that I was a horrible murdering man and changed her view throughout the years. But it's just sad, the hatred that religion teaches people. The Catholic Church held masses for my soul, that I am the devil.
Yeah.
In Marlborough, Massachusetts, they flew a black flag at half-mast with a huge sign, "This flag flies in protest of Bill Baird, peddler of death." And they would not baptize a baby in the Catholic Church of this mother because she said, I admire Baird's courage. That's all. Wow.
Yeah.
You know,
and I'm fond of pointing out how the Bible, and Barry and I talked about how the Bible's not against abortion. Go ahead, Reverend.
Yeah, I think it's very important that people understand that how crucial these elections are. Because, again, if you listen to the conventional news, you're going to hear Mitch McConnell say, well, of course we're not going to change the rule against filibusters now, and we wouldn't do it if we had a majority of Republicans. I do not believe that for 1 nanosecond, not 1 nanosecond. And then what are they going to do? They're going to be able to pass a law, not that codifies Roe versus Wade, but that overturns it completely. And then where will people go to make their constitutional arguments? Because now, with these 5 characters saying there is no right to privacy in the Constitution, at least not for abortion, why not go after contraceptives for unmarried people next? They're not going to want to talk about that in the elections. I know, John, you are probably a little more optimistic than I am that there's going to be a kind of pushback to this so that lots of more new people will come out and vote for Democrats. But they have to be Democrats who seriously and unequivocally take the rights of women to heart.
Oh, absolutely. And I do think they may have gone, I think they may have gone too far, Reverend, and I do think that Alito may have gotten people enthused to vote in these midterms in a way Joe Biden couldn't dream of. At the same time, I also fear, or I also think it's a very real possibility that the Supremes might realize they have awakened a sleeping giant and they will merely keep Roe safe for the time being while upholding the Mississippi law. But I want to go back to something Bill Baird said, because, sir, when you were discussing these horrible, destructive ways that women had injured themselves trying to terminate a pregnancy when they didn't have the information. And again, it's always a punishment on poverty. Wealthy women will always be able to go see doctors. It will be poor people who suffer from here. But, you know, it made me realize and think about the fact that should they succeed in destroying abortion rights for women and criminalizing the procedure, as you well know, Mr. Baird, it will not end abortion. It will only end the safe, legal kind. And I think that...
And not only one in there, but way beyond that, my case, Baird v. Eisenstadt, which legalized birth control for unmarried people, much to the shock of many people listening, because when you listen to some of my allies, they always talk about Griswold versus Connecticut, and they forget that if you read the case, it was for only married people. I thought that was very timid, and that's why I risked a 10-year jail term. I say, no, somebody's got to fight for unmarried people. They're just as important as married people, and I did, and of course I had to go to jail for that. But eventually the Supreme Court did hear me on March 22nd, 1972, and that's how it did become legal. But if you remember, their belief system is a fertilized egg is a person from conception. That would outline IUDs, which medically are called an abortifacient, prevents the fertilized egg from attaching to the wall of the uterus. Certain birth control pills act as abortifacients as well. So there are many different ways that birth control would be stopped, and I predict they will stop birth control if the abortion law is tampered with by this court. But the sad note is people don't think it's ever going to be them. If I could tell you how many times thousands of people from every state in this country came to me when it was illegal saying, I never thought I'd meet you in person. I saw you on television, but I opposed you even, but I need your help now. And I always not me to judge you, just I'll help you. And we did.
Yep, and that's what you do, and without judgment. And Barry, let me bring it back to you, because you're the lawyer here. I mean, we were talking previously in the show about the Ninth Amendment, and it seems like the Supreme Court and maybe everybody else has forgotten about the Ninth Amendment. I mean, are we at a place now where we're forgetting that citizens are allowed privacy in their own personal medical decisions?
Well, sadly, we are. And the Ninth Amendment, I've always been a fan of it, but it doesn't have much history. This is, of course, one that basically says if we don't specify a right in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's left up to the states and the people. It's a ringing endorsement of privacy. And it does, as Bill says, and you've just been talking about this, it's not going to end abortion. It is going to end legal, safe abortions. I cannot tell you the number of doctors in practice now who were also in practice at the time that abortion was illegal, who would literally tell me. Women came to me begging me to help them. That's the world we're going to go back to. You don't have to look at The Handmaid's Tale on television. You just need to talk to some of the women who lived through
Well, I had countless women who came to me and told me they started to take their clothes off. I said, what are you doing? Don't I have to have sex with you? Like, ma'am, I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, I went to his motel room and this guy had sex with me and then he told me to get out. He didn't do the abortion. I said, that's the quacks that are all... Well, those are the things that encouraged me to fight as hard as I could. And I did. What I never anticipated, though, I got kicked in the head from Now. Now told me to get out of their movement. Betty Friedan called me a CIA agent. Planned Parenthood put in writing the time I was arrested in Boston, they said, nothing be gained by the Baird case. He's an embarrassment to us.
That's right.
And that took away a lot of support. But here's the last point I want to make about that. When I was being arrested at the Boston University, I said to the students, I said, hey, you told me that the ACLU would be here to defend me, and are you here? And the ACLU did not stand up. I repeated it 2 more times. And on the 3rd time, they said, Baird, we're here. We'll go into court with you, and we'll defend you. And what do you think happened? 3 weeks later, the ACLU, which I served on the board of directors for several years, said, quote, Bill Baird, we talked this over with Planned Parenthood. We agree with them. Your case has no constitutional merit. You are now on your own.
That's right. And this is after Baird versus Eisenstadt before the Supreme Court.
Yep. So I didn't know what in the world to do because I was panicked. I had 4 kids. How, if I'm going to be tossed in jail for up to 10 years, what do I do? So a great guy, who I lost as my friend, Joe Valero, devout Catholic, but he normally handled tough criminals like murderers and so forth. He says, I don't like liberals, but I like you because you got guts. He says, I'll represent you. And he took me all the way up as I was headed to the Supreme Court. And guess what in the world happened? I had to fire him. And the reason I fired him, this is my friend, and it's cost me a friendship that I cry about inside still. What had happened was I got a call from U.S. Senator Joseph, not Tidings, but Ernest Gruening from Alaska. He said, I want Joe Tidings to represent you from the U.S. Senate. He's a great guy. I said, why would I do that? I can't betray my friend. He said, no. He said, you're not betraying him. You're giving women a better chance because they go to lunch with the Supreme Court and they play tennis with the court. And you have a better chance since they know him and they respect him. And so based on that logic, I had to let Joe go. And he sued me, by the way. He lost, as I knew he would. But it cost me that friendship. And I agreed because he's a great lawyer and a good friend. But I just had to make a decision. Do I fight for my friendship, which is what was important, but a greater value, to can I save somebody else's life? And that's the choice I made.
And that's why I find your work and your life's work, Mr. Baird, to be so inspirational, because you're a guy who's had to move so many times. Your clinic was firebombed. You've been shot at in your home. You've been punched. You've been kicked. You've been spat on. You've gone to jail 8 times. What advice, and let me ask this in closing because we got to hit a break. Let me ask both of you, what advice do you give to women and men who are terrified right now about what might happen, and how can we fight conscientiously and effectively?
Barry, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, men cause the problem of unwanted pregnancies. And men overwhelmingly are now talking, even some governors in southern states are talking about the very thing that we are chatting about now. Literally making it a criminal offense if you're not married to obtain contraceptives. And the courts kind of already floated that idea in that infamous Hobby Lobby case, because part of the Hobby Lobby company's argument was that the things that they didn't want to provide to their women employees included contraceptives, which, as Bill pointed out, many of them think without any scientific basis are abortion-inducing, their abortifacients. I think people have got to wake up and realize they can't depend on the existing number of pro-choice people in Congress, that we have to come out with the intensity that many of us did during the Trump election to say this is fundamentally something that will change, alter, destroy the very fabric of America. Women will become second-class citizens, and men ought to get out and do what they're supposed to do. When I went 6 months ago or so to a big women's march here in Washington, I don't think there was one man for every 20 marchers. One man for every 20 marchers. Men,
that's what we have to do. We have to recognize, first of all, that this is a movement for people. And I don't care if you're white, black, polka dot, gay, straight, a male, female. We all should unite as one and realize that if we do that, we have far greater power. And I just would realize, I hope that realize that women have to accept men as allies and not call people like me who's had 6 Supreme Court cases, but 3 that bear my name, to have those cases heard and win, and then you kick them out saying, well, you really can't be trusted because you're a man. I go to the only one who goes to the Right to Life Convention, and I can document this easy enough. I monitor what they do for years. There's about 2,000 and just me outside, and my beloved wife, Joni, carrying an 8-foot wooden cross. This is free women from the cross of oppression. Keep abortion legal or make abortion legal. And we would pick it out there, but inside, most of the 2,000 people were women. All of the leaders that I saw from each state were women fighting against women. So we have to realize it isn't men fighting only against women. It's a lot of women who fight, and we have to unite and say, hold it. We've got to unite as one and realize the only one who's the expert about that pregnancy is that woman, and she should be allowed to go to any medical care that she thinks she can get.
We have to hit our break, but I thank you both so much. Mr. Baird, a longtime fan. It's really a pleasure to have you, and I hope you'll join us again. Reverend Barry, how do we follow you and keep up with you on socials?
No, just go to barrywlynn.com. That's my website. We're getting some new stuff up soon. So that's it.
Gentlemen, thank you both for inspiring me tonight and for inspiring others. Hope to have you both back. We'll be right back with your calls.
Signorelli Show.
We need to